Check, check, check. Hey, back on YouTube Live. Actually, in the studio, I'm trying to decorate a little bit more. I've got this right here. This is a painting that a good friend of mine, who's just an amazing painter. Actually, she also did this one here. I went over and I sat there and I described the language of breath. I described my overall philosophy of breath work, what breath work is, what it does, what's happening in us when we practice breath work, the goals, the joys, the pleasures, all these things that come with breath work. And this is what I got. And I got to say, I'm really happy with it. You might have seen me on a few videos I've recently done that I had an actual t-shirt. So the front of the t-shirt looks like this, and then the back of the t-shirt looks like this. And I am in the process of doing a release of that t-shirt. However, I do have a option where if you are on the YouTube channel, if you go to a part of my YouTube channel, you can go to where it says store, and then actually you can buy the shirt from there. So anyway, that is an option. But I am also in the process of finding another vendor. I don't know, like I actually did purchase one copy of the shirt from the vendor that I have on YouTube. And actually it fits really well and it feels good and it's comfortable. So I got to say that's good. I haven't washed it yet. So I don't know what's going to happen after I wash it, but I don't feel like it's flimsy material or anything like that. So I feel pretty good about it. So you can find that shirt. It is the official Language of Breath shirt. It's now on the store on my YouTube channel. And I'm learning as I go. I've never really done any of this stuff before when it comes to merchandising and things like that. But I recently trained the first class of Language of breath workers. Actually, that was back in June. And there are now 7 other Language of breath workers other than myself in the world. And this is a thing that we're kind of in the preliminary stages. We really haven't come out to the whole world yet. The Language of Breath online course is in the process of the pre-launch, and we're going to have our website come out really soon. So we're going to have Language of Breath events, online course, and I'm in the process of writing the book. So a lot of really cool things happening. Today, though, is the live session that I do each month dedicated specifically to the Breath Club, the Patreon club that we have members, hundreds of members from around the world who are all interested in living a happier, healthier life using the power of breath. So this is going to be a session where I'm going to be talking about a few things that have everything to do with what is going on in the Breath Club. We're going to be talking about some things that have some really great value when it comes to learning how to get the most out of your breath practice. And I'm going to be answering a question that someone posed this month. Didn't get a lot of questions this month, but that is fine. We've got a lot of things to talk about because I don't really do these lives that much anymore. Do you guys remember whenever I used to do it every week? Hey, Papa Geek. Yes, happy Friday. Just got home from men's gathering in Europe and now YouTube live from Jesse. Happy Friday. Well, happy Friday indeed, my friend. I am it's nice, actually. It's kind of nice being back on a YouTube live. I haven't done a YouTube live probably since last month's Patreon YouTube live. I used to do them every week, and I'm planning on trying to get back in the habit of doing them every week. It's that I've been really busy. And what have I been doing? I have been writing a book. So many of you guys have already read my first book, A Practical Guide to Breath Work, which is still a very well-selling book, one of the most recommended books there is on the topic of breath work in the world. So I'm really, really honored by all the positive feedback I've gotten on that. And I hope that it is doing a lot of good out there. I get a lot of positive reviews, and that always makes me feel good. I'm doing my next book. The next book is literally going to be on the language of breath, which is ultimately my overall philosophy as it has developed over all of these years. learning all the different techniques I've learned, and then learning what the underpinnings are. What is the actual biological, the physiological underpinnings of breathing techniques, not just breathing techniques. Like, what does this breathing technique do? That is good, and I've covered a lot of that in my first book. This next book is covering a lot of how we look at ourselves as humans, and what we believe about ourselves affects how we treat ourselves, and how effective our treatments can be. And ultimately, one of the things that I talk about is how this all relates to breathing. So I'm in the process of doing all this deep research, getting confused, and then more confused and more confused, learning from philosophers and neuroscientists. This past week has just been neuroscientist after neuroscientist, philosopher after philosopher, because of some of the things I'm trying to do, which is breaking some new ground in the way we look at ourselves. So I'm really excited to be sharing that, and that should be coming out next year. But in the meantime, actually at the end of this month, we should be launching the languageofbreathcollective.com. And that it will be our website for all of the Language of breath workers, for the online course, and for anybody who's wanting to become a breath worker. So next year in June or July, one of those 2 months, we're going to be holding the next breathworker training program. So the Language of breathworker training program. And this is where we will be, it's about 14 hours of online training. And then it is a 3 to 4 day intensive on site. And in that amount of time, you learn everything there is to learn, both when it comes to how breath work works, how to work with clients, and then also, hey, how do I navigate in the breathwork world as an entrepreneur, as a person who wants to make a living doing something like this? This is something I've been very blessed that this is what I do for a living, and it's something that I had to learn a lot of things the hard way. So a lot of exciting things coming up in the next few months. So this month is the month of August, and we've released the 2 breathing sessions in the Patreon club. And I hope you're enjoying those, to all the tribe. We just released those yesterday. And one of them is quite profound. Actually, both of them are. One of them, whenever I come up with breathing sessions, I do a lot of, okay, what is the end goal? How do I want people to feel? What is the experience going to be like? It's like writing a song or a movie or painting or something like that. And so I kept on working, and eventually I was like, okay, this one is just going to be something that we're going to relax and we're going to breathe to. And so anyway, looking forward to hearing some feedback on that. So this session today, we're going to be answering a question from Molly Matthew. Molly Matthew is our CO2 guy. He asks a lot of questions, and they're usually regarding CO2. So we're gonna take a look at the question now, and we're gonna see what we have to say about this. So Molly Matthew asks about the about CO2. Okay, so he said now he did give this to me late. So he gave this to me, I think, just yesterday. It looks like maybe within the past 8 hours, he gave me this question. So I didn't get a chance to do a whole lot of prep for this. And I'm going to just read it. This is not the first time I read it, but anyway, here it goes. He says, I've been doing big bottom triangle while walking. So for those of you guys who are not familiar, big bottom triangle, this is something that I have in my book. That's my name for it. Big bottom triangle is in some, like, for instance, in Buteyko method, they have a technique that they call the controlled pause. There's a few different styles of breath work that involve a neutral lung apnea. Big bottom triangle is an extension of what I also titled the technique bottom triangle. And it involves an inhale, an exhale, and a neutral lung apnea. And these are not for long periods of time. They're usually just for maybe 4 seconds, 6 seconds, 8 seconds, something like that. And so the purpose of this is threefold. One is that it gives you some kind of a metered breathing style to allow you to have a breathing cadence the more regular your breathing cadence, the more your nervous system feels comfortable. When it's erratic, it becomes more excited. And so we want to have a nice breathing cadence that is controlled, that's balanced, that is not erratic. So any breathing technique in that respect does that for you. Another thing that it does is it slows down breathing. It extends the length of each breath. So for instance, if you did bottom triangle, you might say, okay, I'm going to inhale for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and then hold my breath with a neutral lung for about 4 seconds. And so if you were to do that, you would notice a few things. First of all, you're breathing more slowly. You're going to also become more parasympathetic dominant. So that's going to change every aspect of your physiology, which is really amazing to think about, that something like breathing can do something like that. So you're going to breathe in, you're going to breathe out, you're going to hold. And you repeat this. That is what we call bottom triangle. So breathe in, breathe out, hold, breathe in, breathe out, hold. And you keep going through this process as long as you want to go through it. And so, for instance, let's just think through that, though. If you were to do 4 in, 4 out, and then hold for 4, that means every breath takes 12 seconds. A 12-second interval from the time you inhale to the time you inhale again. So that in itself is slowing your breathing down to the level where you're breathing fewer than 6 breaths per minute. That's pretty incredible. And when that happens, your autonomic nervous system picks that up. It says, okay, let's relax. Let's go into a more sympathetic dominant state. And that, again, that changes your physiology, that changes your hormonal profile, that changes the amount of adrenaline and all these stress hormones that are in your body. It changes that. It changes your blood pressure. It changes your heart rate. All these changes happen simply because you're becoming more parasympathetic. And so when we do big bottom triangle, we do the same thing, only the bottom part, or the controlled pause. Okay. So we inhale, we exhale. Maybe we inhale for 4, we exhale for 4. Maybe that controlled pause is 8. Okay. So in for 4, out for 4, hold for 8. And we repeat that over and over and over and over again. Okay. If you do that, well, okay, now you have a 16-second breath. That is a very long time between inhale to the next inhale. So you're slowing your breath down further. And then from there, you're also increasing your CO2 in the blood. And that's one of the reasons why people do bottom triangle or big bottom triangle, is because when you inhale and you exhale and you allow for a pause, during that pause, the CO2 that you have will start to accumulate. And as long as you're not doing an incredibly big breath, and as long as the volume of the air on your inhale and your exhale stay the same. So for instance, if you're inhaling 2 liters, exhaling 2 liters, and then having a breath hold, and then doing exactly the same thing, then over time you would notice that you have an accumulation of CO2. And of course, if you reduce the volume, that CO2 begins to build up faster because you're not ridding yourself of as much CO2. So that's why we train with bottom triangle. And that's why big bottom triangle is something that I use when I train people. It's something that's in my book, A Practical Guide to Breath Work. And you can also see it in the Patreon Club. We have some sessions that utilize big bottom triangle. Actually, you know what? It's been a while since we've done any triangle breathing. So maybe next month we'll bring back some metered breathing, some triangle breathing, and we'll get that into the mix. That'll be for you, Matthew. So anyway, what he has is a question, and this is something a lot of people find that happens to them. He says, okay, he's been pushing it. Okay. So he's been doing big bottom triangle while walking. So if you're doing metered breath while exercising, you're also having a greater production of CO2, because cellular respiration will result in a greater production of CO2, which makes it so that you will accumulate even more CO2 in your blood. So you're not just sitting there and you're accumulating a little extra CO2 because you're having that pause between the breaths. You're also adding more production. So you're accumulating it even more. So this is really cool. He says, He does really good, and there's really not a lot of struggle. But then he says he starts to push it, and he's been cautious with it for a few reasons. And he says, here's what I've been having happen to me. He says, when I push it, he starts to get reduced field of vision, and my hearing is less acute. And overall, my thoughts are slower and I feel off. He says, I continue for a while. My heart rate goes up. And I feel pressure in my temples, he says, behind my eyes. He says it's fairly painful. He says he noticed the same thing after 10 to 15 minutes, was that he was left with some pain in his eyes, temples, forehead for the rest of the day until he fell asleep. And then after that, apparently he was okay. He said he would guess that he has something to do with the oxygen being lower and the blood pressure is increasing. But he's not sure. He's wondering what I think about it. Okay, so when it comes to CO2 tolerance training, one of the reasons why we train for CO2 tolerance is because when we have a higher CO2 tolerance, when we have a higher amount of CO2 in the blood, CO2 is a vasodilator, which generally will reduce blood pressure, and it can really help keep us in a more relaxed state. It is something, though, that there's a reason why we don't do CO2 tolerance training to excess or to degrees whenever we're just feeling like, like what he is describing for us. Ultimately, you have to understand that when you're training CO2, the difficulty that comes with training CO2 is that CO2 is also one of the most stressful things that you can experience. Like, there's receptors in your brainstem, and your brainstem is primarily responsible for survival. So it's the thing that's going to kick you into the state of fight or flight. And so what you're experiencing, Matthew, is ultimately whenever the CO2 raises, you've got a certain level where you're comfortable. And ultimately, if you stay in the state where you're not pushing it, so ideally, this is what we want to do. We want to push it to the point where it's uncomfortable but tolerable. Now, if you're having a headache, or if you're experiencing racing of the heart, or if you're experiencing any of those types of symptoms that you mentioned, okay, narrowing of the field of vision, that's a fight or flight response. Just feeling off, that is a sign that you're overtraining CO2. And I've been there. I've done that myself. And so ultimately, you should back off. And the reason for that is you've kicked yourself into the state of fight or flight without you realizing it. And a person might say, well, how is it I'm breathing slow, which should send a signal to my autonomic nervous system to relax? Yes, there is that. But you have to understand that breathing, the breath tempo and the smoothness and evenness of the breath, those are signals. But also, whenever you slow down to a certain degree, whenever you're having so much CO2 that your brainstem is getting a suffocation response, it believes it's being suffocated, that's going to override the message that you're sending with the slowness and the evenness and the smoothness of your breath. So the good news is you don't have to push it so hard. So I know maybe, and I will say, I've been getting messages from Matthew for months now about his training of CO2, and I highly commend you for training CO2. Just don't train it so hard. And this is for a couple reasons. Whenever we do any kind of breath training, especially when we do breath training that puts us into an uncomfortable state, you have to understand that your nervous system is always going to try to protect you. So you've got an unconscious part of yourself that's trying to protect you and help you to thrive and survive at all times. And so it takes a long time for you to develop positive habits, and it takes a long time for your nervous system to let its guard down. And that's what we're doing whenever we're training CO2. We're letting our guard down against suffocation. But the problem is it takes forever for our nervous system to let its guard down, but it only takes a second. It's very quick to put all those blocks right back up because it's always trying to help you. It's always trying to protect you. So the best strategy for training CO2 is slow, gradual, continual over time. You can't cram CO2. And there will be a time whenever the better move is, instead of to go for to push the intensity, the better move is to go to push more duration. So longer time, a longer session of CO2 tolerance training versus an extreme feel. Another thing you can do, Molly, because you've been doing this for long enough, I would recommend you can do bottom triangle, just regular bottom triangle for maybe maybe 2 to 5 minutes as you walk, and then do a maximum breath hold with a neutral lung and see how many steps you can take. Then see if you can go back into slow breathing, or maybe even triangle breathing, or some kind of a bottom triangle breath pattern without being exasperated. And yes, you're gonna, there'll be a kind of oh my God, I'm suffocating, but then you bring yourself back with control and stay relaxed. That right there would be the best if you want to push it a little bit and go into maybe a little bit more extreme. That would be the better strategy, rather than to push it for long periods of time and then ultimately putting yourself in a panic state, because that's what it sounds like you were in. So thank you so much for that question. That is I commend anybody who is doing CO2 tolerance training. Not many people like doing CO2 tolerance training, and it's simply because it's not as blissful as doing circular breathing, or like Wim Hof breathing, or doing any of the ones where you're actually letting go of a lot of CO2. And so anytime I meet people who are really into training CO2, I'm really impressed, because I don't even like training CO2. I do it. I do train CO2, but I don't do it as much as I don't do as much as I could. I generally train CO2 once or twice a day to keep my CO2 tolerance above 60 whenever I use the exhale test. I want to make sure that I'm breathing through my nose as much as possible. And so, I try throughout the day to check in to make sure I'm not over breathing. But anybody who's doing CO2 tolerance training knows that you can really feel amazing whenever you get into CO2 tolerance training. And whenever you do it regularly, for instance, there was a time I was doing 4 to 5 sessions per day. So that would be 10-minute sessions for 4 to 5 times in a day. Man, you start really feeling comfortable in your own skin, and your breathing slows down, your sleep improves. Matthew, I would be really interested to hear how your sleep has changed over the course of the time you've been training. And basically, if you have any other questions, or if there's anything else you'd like me to talk about, let me know, and I'd be happy to do that. Guys, when it comes to the coming year, we've got a lot of interesting things coming up in the Breath Club. The Breath Club, of course, gets right now until the end of this month. So if you're looking to take the online course, the Language of Breath online course, you get the biggest discount of anybody. And that discount is all the way up until September 1st. And that is because we are still in our pre-launch. So the pre-launch is right now. The Language of Breath course covers all breath work. And it's not covering other people's techniques. It's covering the foundations of how all breath work works, and the philosophy that I've come up with over the past 7 years of training breath work, training clients, and doing enormous amounts of research. And ultimately what this is, it's not just, hey, learn these techniques. Isn't that cool? Like, so much of breath work is, hey, learn these techniques. Isn't that cool? And if you practice this one long enough, then you'll get this result. Ultimately, the thing that you'll get if you do the Language of Breath work system is you learn to get past the mind-body paradigm, and you learn that you can actually be partners. You can have a relationship with yourself, with your conscious and your unconscious self. And you can start to trust yourself. You can start to be confident in yourself. You're not constantly worried, am I doing this trick? Am I practicing this particular technique at this time of day? It becomes more fluid than any other system of breath work out there. And so I'm really proud of it. It is really some of my best work ever. And right now, if you are a subscriber of my email list, if you go to my website, jessekumar.com, you'll be getting an email soon for $50 off. And if you're in the Patreon club, you get even more. So the Patreon members are always the ones that I give the biggest discounts to on anything that I do. And so always be watching for that as things are coming forward. Guys, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Matthew for the question. Guys, if you want to, I've got a lot of people in the gold tier. I just don't get as many questions. Maybe I've already answered all of your questions, but I'd love to talk about whatever topics you'd like me to talk about next time. And feel free to send me direct messages through Patreon or to comment as much as you'd like. I want to thank you all for being here, and I'm looking forward to what's coming next. We're working on a program, a breathwork program for recovering addicts. We're kind of working through that and to see how we can best serve them. That is something that I'm going to be, I'll have a price and then I'll have another option. If you don't have the money, you click here and it's free, because I don't want money to be the thing that gets in the way of a person having a better recovery. And literally the only reason I can do that is because I have the Patreon club to help support me financially. So that is something that is coming in the near future. I'm also working with first responders, and I'm creating a training program for first responders, because we expect those people to make amazing decisions in the worst possible situations. And so I want to put you in the best possible situation psychologically and physiologically. So we're creating a whole breathing protocol specifically for first responders, and that is coming up. I'll be talking about that more, and we should be getting that through hopefully in the next 90 days. We'll be seeing that implemented in training programs, and that is super exciting. It's literally history in the making. So good things are happening, and I want to thank everybody that's in the Patreon club. If you're not in the Patreon club, check us out. We are really nice, and we're fun to be around. We're cool too. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for being here. If you guys have any questions, or if there's anything you'd like to reach out to have me talk about in the future, feel free to email me or talk to me on the Patreon club. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time. See you, Papa Geek. Let's go. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.